Open the Stigma with cross-pollinating conversations is a space centered on intentional conversations with people working in healing, mental health, and community care. Together, we explore healing, vulnerability, and the stories that help open the stigma and deepen understanding. Today with me, I'm joined by Ashlee Cabral, a licensed marriage and family therapist who specializes in grief counseling and grief education. Ashlee has been working in this field for over a decade, following an earlier career as a hospice grief counselor and program coordinator, where she worked supporting individuals and families through profound loss, transition, and uncertainty. Her work is shaped by both extensive professional experience and her own lived experience with loss. Ashlee holds a deeply compassionate belief that while grief can shake our foundation, each of us carries an inner wisdom that helps guide us through it. Beyond her clinical work, Ashlee is deeply passionate about expanding access to grief education. She offers community trainings, mentors and supervises new clinicians, and provides concrete resources for people in acute and crisis stages of grief. She's been a university instructor and clinical supervisor for graduate counseling programs. Ashlee brings creativity, humor, and humanity into her work, believing that laughter and tears are both essential parts of healing. She also integrates geek therapeutics into her practice, weaving play, creativity, and imagination into the therapeutic process. And on a personal note, Ashlee is not only an incredible clinician and educator, but also my supervisor. She is truly one of the most supportive and thoughtful supervisors that anyone could ask for. And just a note, she also has two of the cutest furry friend companions, and I'm really excited for this conversation today.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. It's a delight to be here, and you make it easy to be your supervisor. So I'm happy to have this conversation today.
Yeah, is there anything else that you would like to self-introduce or say about yourself?
I think you covered it. Yeah, really appreciate the introduction. I guess the only thing I would add is that I'm recently moved to Washington State, so I'm now licensed in California and Washington and working in private practice. Um, Yeah, so I'm happy to be able to expand to a different area a little bit.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, well, to start us off today, maybe you can share with us what first drew you to working in grief counseling and therapy, and what really resonates you most about the work that you're doing.
Mm. Yeah, what first drew me to grief counseling and therapy is maybe not the most exciting thing. I needed hours for my practicum and to get licensed. And someone who knew my background and history, which I'll expand on a little bit more, suggested grief counseling. And I went, what's grief counseling? I've never done this, I've never heard of it. And that was very surprising considering I lost my dad to a homicide at the age of 8 and had never experienced grief counseling, had never done anything like that. But as soon as I understood and learned a little bit more about the hospice grief counseling, which I became a part of, I knew that's where I needed to be. And the work that I needed to be doing, and was kind of the culmination of everything that I had wanted to be able to provide in the counseling field.
Mhm.
Um, it's been both a healing journey for me and my own grief process after many, many years, and kind of a way for me to make meaning out of the experience that I had and be able to support other people through their grief journey.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, especially as something so personal, with what happened with your father, um, and how that's really inspired you throughout the evolution of your work and with grief. Something that was really educational for me when beginning to do grief work was the understanding that there's really no endpoint to grief, that there's a continuation of it being like an integration process, and that it might continue to evolve and change at different times of our life, especially since it's so dynamic and not something that's static. So there's so much change that can happen over time. And it's a non-linear process too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think grief kind of continues to evolve, every day and in different ways. And I think that's one of the things that I think many people find hard and invigorating, and also a way to kind of stay connected to the person that you love and that you lost, is that they're still part of you kind of in every day. I think of my dad often, and especially with the work that I do, it's both a way in which I relate to clients and people that I talk to in grief, and just shapes kind of my understanding of my world as well.
Yeah. While you were working in hospice grief support, before your private practice, how do you feel that those early experiences shaped your approach to grief work today, if it had?
Absolutely. It's so in the hospice that I was working for, we offered community grief support for free to anyone in the community that had experienced a loss. And that was really any age, typically, as young as like kind of early elementary school, all the way up to, I think my oldest client was 98. And all different kind of types of loss, different kinds of experiences that people had. And it really expanded my both awareness of what other people's grief experiences are, and the different types of losses and the way that we cope with loss, the way that we kind of grow from that, especially. And the setting itself, I think, was really impactful and meaningful in that I supported so many people. I couldn't tell you the number, but because it was short term and because I was there for so many years, it's probably in the hundreds. And
Mhm.
it gave me such a wealth of experience of just being able to hear so many different stories and connect with so many different people on this really deep, intimate level. And it's very different than many therapy experiences, because people are coming in the most difficult parts of their life and are really ready and open to talking about their experience and doing the work. And I'm so grateful, and I feel so kind of honored that I got to experience that and be a part of people's lives in a way that it
Mhm.
was so intimate and so meaningful. And I learned an incredible amount from my clients. That
Yeah.
was something that I take with me, those learnings today, to my private practice and to my supervision and all the different ways that I'm, yeah, still providing grief support.
Yeah. There's something that feels so like connected to humanness
Hmm.
in the landscape of grief, because there's so much like de-arming through the rawness and tenderness. I think that kind of comes out within loss, and within the
Hmm.
ache of what once was, and the uncertainty for what will be, that I find within grief, it really just places us in the present and in the here and now, especially within the like disorienting context of just how life changes
Hmm.
within, the loss of a loved one, the transitions of life. Um, I know that there's, we're discussing at this moment that the grief associated with the loss of a loved one, but it seems that it's also really dynamic to situational, and how grief can show up through, yeah, other contexts. I'm curious of how maybe that translates for you in your work, with like working with folks that have lost a loved one, or how someone might be experiencing loss in a different way. Do you find there to be parallels, or does it feel different?
There's absolutely parallels. It's one of the things that I won't shut up about is how how much grief is just a part of everything that we do, and loss and transition, especially as most of what people are navigating and might even be struggling with is some type of loss and transition in some way, whether that's a breakup or an ending of a job or even burnout or loss of identity, whatever that might be.
Mm-hmm.
Grief is a part of it. And, unfortunately, I think there's not a lot of education and awareness in our day to day, at least in our culture, and,
Yeah.
space for grief.
Mm-hmm.
And, and then when we look at kind of bigger world issues and things happening in our country, there's so much grief
Mm-hmm.
in everything that we experience. And I think often not knowing what to do with that grief and not knowing how to honor it can be really hard. And it's one of the things that I take with me into my private practice, into teaching, into a lot of different things is if we can kind of learn how to sit with grief and learn how to, uh, you know, embrace it, challenge it, navigate it. It really can help us in so many different areas. It's definitely helped me with other areas of my life. In my private practice now, I do work with people that are not necessarily coming in for the loss uh, of a person, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Not necessarily coming in for the loss of a person, but might be coming in, due to some other struggle in their life. And still, grief is a big part of that, whether that's just being able to kind of name and acknowledge the reality of what they're experiencing or tolerate the different emotions and feelings, cope with how this big thing in their life is changing their identity. All of this is grief. It's how we kind of navigate through the world.
Mm-hmm.
I think breaking it down in that fundamental way, really helps me, and
Mm-hmm.
um, I think kind of makes sense of what we're experiencing as well.
Yeah. It's reminding me of this quote by Alan Wolfelt, which I'll summarize it as, let me see, like that you will learn over time that the pain of your grief will keep trying to get your attention until you have the courage to gently and in small doses open up to its presence, and
Mhm.
how the alternative of denying or suppressing your pain is in fact even more painful. And
Yeah.
I'm really see like with what you're mentioning, how there's like an entry point within grief because it can feel like so overwhelming and consuming that it's like where do we begin?
Mhm.
And I hear you, at least in the ways in which for me I'm interpreting you describing is coming into this place of acceptance or awareness of like, okay, this is something that's here, and in small doses, how do I begin to be with it? Um,
Mhm.
because it definitely doesn't feel like a tunnel of just, okay, we're gonna get through it, and like, yes, there is something on the other side, but at least for me, in the ways in which even recently that I've been moving through grief or how I move and work with it with clients, it often feels like a labyrinth.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, like often sometimes I don't know where the tunnel will end or how it will end, but at least
Mhm.
I'm feeling like some movement around it, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
that absolutely makes sense. And I think the idea that grief will show itself in one way or another, and grief can be both patient and impatient, and that it will still be there, even if you push it down or try to ignore it. And so often, I think the scary part is just setting foot in the labyrinth or setting foot moving forward. And then once we're there, we might not be able to see what's on the other side of the wall, but we know that we're on the path and we're moving forward. And
Mm-hmm.
I think with grief, getting in the door, opening yourself up to it, hearing what your grief has to say can feel really scary and daunting and overwhelming. And by just acknowledging it and saying it's here and letting yourself feel and being there, so
Mhm.
many people often feel a sense of relief and a sense of just the immediate, like deep breath, and then we do it again, we keep doing that and we keep building up the tolerance for being able to do that and in different ways. And then suddenly we look back and we're halfway through, or maybe maybe that implies that there's some sort of ending to it, but maybe we just grow more comfortable with that space and learn to kind of make it beautiful and live in it and embrace kind of the unknowing of that.
Mhm.
I think that's a big part of grief is sort of trusting in the unknown and not knowing where it's going to go, but
Yeah.
being able to find those kind of resources within yourself and outside of yourself and
Mhm.
uh, yeah, journeying on it. And I get to do that with clients. I know you do as well. And it's one of the things that I love to do.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something too about that I find within grief work, that I feel really moved by that maybe in some other contexts of working with clients because there's so much like goals and what are we working with and the process and the progress that within like grief work, that there's such a radical acceptance of like acceptance that like not trying to change something, especially
Hmm.
with something so devastating. And I think I'm pulling from experience here with working with bereaving parents that um, there's nothing to say that can like I'm not trying to make it better, that it's just like offering companionship through their process and not trying to change it. And I know something that my therapist said to me when we were doing grief work was some frustration that I was feeling within like being in the labyrinth and hitting a wall and trying to like, okay, I'm going to try a different path. And oh my gosh, I'm hitting another wall. That he said to me that just because nothing's happening doesn't mean that nothing's happening.
Hmm.
And there was a real, I think, like acceptance around it that felt like, oh, maybe I'm not needing to change something. And it doesn't mean that nothing's happening at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
this like profound way that we're just sitting with grief. And I think that was one of the most intimidating things when I first started grief counseling was how could I possibly sit with somebody whose experience I don't understand or I don't, that I haven't, even though I've experienced profound loss, it's so different than, what do I say? How do I be in this? And it's so much that you're just walking with the person through the maze and
Mhm.
being that support and not saying this is where to turn or but helping them find their own way through it and even creating new paths or helping expand to the bigger picture because I think often when you're in the depth of the grief it's hard to
Mhm.
see the progress that you've made and also to see that there is kind of hope in the future or light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that was something that I was like, what do I say? How do I know kind of what to do? How do I be a therapist, in this context and in grief work, which is so much about presence and about holding space and um, truly, truly listening. And that was the wisdom that I received from my supervisors was how to listen, how to not try to make sense of this for someone, but how to help them find their own way through it, and
Mhm.
that each grief experience is unique and natural and normal. And I still take that with me today, and I think it's given me more context and experience to be able to offer, hey, here's maybe what some other people experience if that's helpful for you. And your experience is your own. And,
Mhm.
needing to find kind of what's going to work for each individual.
Yeah. And I'm really recognizing just your your background and your years of experience in this field. And something I'm holding currently like some curiosity around, especially with the intentionality of these conversations and with opening the stigma. Um, are there common misconceptions or stigmas that you think that people might have or hold around grief?
Hmm. A lot. Yeah. Yeah, I think that the thing that comes to mind for me is not so much in the work that I do or the work that, well, I guess that some people do, but it's that kind of idea of like, what do I say? How do I, whether you're a therapist or a friend or family member, whatever the context is, this idea that like I can't possibly understand this grief, so how can I be supportive to somebody? And
Mhm.
I think unfortunately that's where so many people feel isolated and feel um like the grief is this big scary thing and feel so alone in their grief because people around them feel scared and don't know what to say. And I remember actually the wisdom that a client told me that I still take with me and now I share with others is that you're gonna say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
You're gonna say something that doesn't resonate, and that's okay. Because sometimes when you're in your grief, nothing is right and
Yeah.
nothing is okay. And the fact that you just keep showing up and
Yeah.
the fact that you keep trying and the fact that you keep listening is the most important thing. And actually the trying to relate to people in grief is sometimes the worst part
Yeah.
because most people don't want you to relate to their grief. They just want their grief to be heard. They
Mhm.
don't want to hear about your loss. They want you to hear about theirs.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I think, the most wisdom that I take that I hope makes it a little bit easier for people to just sit with a friend or somebody who's grieving is that you don't have to say the right thing. In
Mm.
fact, you're not going to say the right thing, and that's okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've noticed myself feeling like a lot of relief and calmness
Mm,
in that, and the like some pressure alleviated in that, and just by mm, knowing that there is an element of just sitting and being with, and the offer of companionship that, okay, like as I'm sitting with this, beyond just a client, sitting with a friend or a loved one, that there's a gentleness of it
mhm,
not feeling like them feeling like too much, or my hope would be that they're not too much.
mhm,
And the presence and care is sometimes the best thing, even if the words, because it's something that I think with grief, it's so deep and even nonverbal, that
mhm,
being with someone in a physical way or a presence that can feel 100% there for someone can feel really comforting. Um, I really appreciate that, and maybe some of the misconceptions and intimidations that people might feel when doing grief work, either with themselves or with another person, because it can be like, whoa, what could I possibly say to, and I think the parallel that I'm making is to rescue this person or to save them from this feeling because it's too much for me to feel, or maybe I don't know how to
mhm,
feel it, or I want to fix it and make it better and make it go away. When someone's in grief, they want to actually maybe be holding on to that until they feel ready, because the grief is the connection to the thing that they lost. And I can
mhm,
understand like a defensiveness too, to wanting to protect that, and almost like, yes, I want to get over it, and yes, I want to move past it, but also there is a part of me that wants to cling on to it because that's the memory of the thing, the person, the pet or something that they're still feeling attachment to, that they're not yet ready to let go of.
yeah, absolutely. And I think there's this fear of like, if I mention this big scary thing, this grief, this loss, it's going to make that person feel worse. Or that I might upset them. And they're thinking about it 24/7. They're thinking about it all the time.
Oh yeah.
And you can always ask permission. You can always say, "Hey, do you want to talk about this or do you want distraction?"
Mhm.
Because sometimes that's what we need too, and that's okay in relationship. And um, I think being able to name the person who died, being able to name and talk about memories and share stories is it's sort of that like be here with me, cry with me, talk about them, say things about them that is is what most people who are grieving are just craving is to name it, to bring it into the room, to not feel alone in what they're experiencing,
Mhm.
even if it's parallel, even if it's not exactly the same.
Yeah. I know that you and I have talked about this in supervisions, and it's coming up for me here, especially with like thinking about grief rituals and holdings. Would you be open to sharing some ways of honoring like a loved one or honoring grief that you often suggest or have tried that has been an ally for you as you support clients through grief or think about ritual or the sacredness of grief?
Yeah, I will answer that with a somewhat of a non-answer, is that it's really going to be dependent on you and your grief and your connection and relationship to the person. And what I'll add to that is that it's going to be different depending on the stage of grief, I think, that you're in. And something that that people will find comforting in their early grief in the first days, weeks, and months after a death might be very different than the long-term
Mhm.
grief or ritual that they create or tradition. And sometimes I think there can be a pressure to feel like we have to figure it out and that we have to stick to this tradition and new ritual. And that's why the holiday times can be some of the hardest times for people who are grieving. And this understanding that your grief will change, your needs will change. Something that you find helpful early on may not be helpful later on. And that doesn't mean that your grief is broken or that your relationship is broken. It just means that you're needing something different.
Mhm.
Um, One of the things that I will offer is that in early grief in particular, having some kind of ritual or tradition or even if it's just bringing awareness to the person at a time when you would normally interact with them can help on a full systemic level. So, for example, you know, um, my dad used to pick me up from school. So, at the times in which he would pick me up from school, that's going to be the time that I think about him the most and that I might feel that absence the most. And so finding a ritual or something in that that feels meaningful to that connection, maybe it's putting on his favorite song during my getting picked up now, or wait, obviously this is when I was a kid, but like finding, as an example, finding something that feels meaningful to the relationship at a time and a place that felt meaningful can help to ease kind of the feeling in your body of something is missing. And I think for early grief in particular, which I tend to work a lot with, is sometimes helpful to try to find that.
Yeah.
Later grief rituals, again, is kind of finding what works for you in the relationship and what you're needing. Maybe it's a yearly tradition, maybe it's changes all the time. There are some years where I honor my grief in a very ritualed kind of way. I might go to the beach or write a letter, and there are some years where I might acknowledge the day that he died, and that might be it. And that's okay. It's okay for things to change and your needs will change.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Mm. Just taking that in and sitting with the changing process, and the only
Mhm.
consistency in life is change, uh,
Mhm. Mhm.
and how mm, the attunement of self and really being with the emergent process of what is here, and what is here today might not be what was here yesterday or here tomorrow. Um, it's a real mm, like self-loving practice
Mhm. Mhm.
that offers a deep care. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. What you just said there of this idea that grief is constantly changing or there's no permanence in it. I think there can be additional grief within that.
Mm,
And often I think we find that as our grief changes, there can almost be a sense of loss of what was, or the way that, uh, even a loss of that previous stage of grief or that previous kind of state of being. And it can also be acknowledging the new reality that that means I'm moving further away from that person. And maybe even that I'm forgetting them in a different way. And
mhm,
it might feel scary to think about building a new relationship with them, or that I don't know what this is going to look like. And I think that can be one of the hardest things when I sit with people is this feeling that it's going to change, and really feeling that grief in a new layer.
yeah. I used this metaphor when I was moving through some grief that it felt like a part of me got like amputated, and I
Hmm.
felt like it was just like free bleeding. And
Hmm.
I just like there was like this runniness and messiness and just
Hmm.
drain. And with time, it felt like I learned how to sew that part of me
Hmm.
up. But there was still this like phantom limb that I was like expecting to see, or would have an itch or a pain that wasn't really there anymore. And it took
Hmm.
time to like, okay, how do I recalibrate with this newness, but also hold resentment or feelings, or the moving of like, oh, I'm moving further from this thing. And that also is bringing up feelings around actually starting to feel okay. And no, I don't want to be okay. Actually, I still want to be sad. Or no, I want that thing that no longer is. And it's just a dynamic and intersectional experience where everything's kind of coexisting at the same time. Mm.
And learning how to live again, learning how to live with loss, I think is huge for so many people. And of course every grief is a bit different, but it's this idea that like I'm a different person now.
Mm.
And my relationships look different, my friendships, my day-to-day life, and even literally learning how to operate in the world. Some people are learning new tasks and new skills that they've never really had to do before.
Mhm.
And yeah, and taking those steps, but also I think there's in some ways more support and acknowledgement for somebody who actually had an amputation or an accident or an injury.
Mhm.
Whereas when you lose a person, it's unseen, like so much of mental health. And I think that's the stigma that we're talking about here is how do we acknowledge that we might be needing so much more in our grief and in this kind of deep personal injury, and whether that's even just giving ourselves the space to acknowledge it in that way and to know that there's more treatment that's needed, there's more support that's needed, there's, you know, physical therapy, mental therapy that's kind of needed to help learn how to walk again, learn how to be in the world again.
Mm.
And
That's
I think that's what we get to do as therapists. But um, yeah, just bringing that awareness, I think, is one of the things that I try to do.
mm. When you look towards the future of, this can be broader, like the mental health field, or as I'm thinking about it, the field of grief work and how it is expanding or evolving. How would you like to see it continue to grow? whether in a clinical way, community support, education, accessibility.
There's a lot. I wish I wish I had a lot of things that, if I had my way of bringing in more grief into the both in the kind of learning environments and even, bigger picture in terms of like policy and legislation. Think
Mm,
that even just for so many therapists, they feel uncomfortable even with supporting people in grief.
mm,
And so I think trying to expand education and really actually integrate it into our therapy training programs is something that I think could be really meaningful to because grief is such a part of everything that we do,
yeah.
offering some more language and ways of supporting people in grief. But also, thinking bigger picture too of just supporting people with their grief load. I mean, even something as simple as, bereavement leave being 3 to 5 days at the most. And that's, if you have benefits and all of those kinds of things, I think is something that is extremely hard, especially because often the hardest grief hits months after a death.
Yeah.
And the times when you're feeling the most depressed or most energetically drained is not in the first days and weeks.
Mm,
That may be a time when most people are in shock.
yes.
So I think even just understanding and spreading that awareness of what grief can look like and what is natural and normal about grief can help kind of reduce some of the shame and the stigma around it, and also to kind of create some space for people to actually get their needs met a little bit more. Um, and I think really helping expand education on a broader level for anyone who may be encountering, whether that's teachers or in professional environments, expanding awareness of how people grieve, I think is how to sit with someone. I think what you're doing here, even just expanding the voices
Mm,
of people who are grieving is so important.
yeah, absolutely. It's making me think of like collective grief, especially right now with what's happening within our country. And I think I felt like a spark in me, especially when you're talking about policy and reform, and just thinking too about how our country and how we talk about grief and hold it without it being this polarizing or stigmatizing experience. And if we can really be with and witness and see with what's happening. Um, and I think with that comes then like too, like collective rage, collective pain. Uh,
Mhm.
and I know for me, there's this desire of how we can, yeah, how the if the field of grief and the work with it could be expanded as almost this desire for it to be accepted. Especially with after the pandemic, there was this like collective grief there and almost like acceptance momentarily, obviously not universally, but um I'm still holding that desire in myself. And I think it definitely inspires me within this work and what motivates me with having these conversations, uh,
Mhm.
because it's not something that we're often taught. And there is no guidebook or formula to make it go away or to make it feel better. But I think that
Yeah,
my hope would be education around how we can feel it. Um, I don't know.
a- absolutely. And I think one of my learnings from the experiences I've had in grief and both personally and sitting with clients is that grief shows up in so many different ways.
Mhm.
And I remember talking to my colleagues in hospice during the pandemic that we felt like this grief was going to show up years later in
Mm,
many ways, especially with complex, extended loss and trauma, is that sometimes we have to get through the survival, we have to get through kind of the immediacy, before the feelings are really felt. Just like in the way that in hesitate to say more simple losses, but in a straightforward loss of a person still takes months sometimes before the grief is really felt and the reality is felt. And I think that we're seeing that a lot in our country and it's kind of unprocessed grief or grief that's coming up in new
Mm,
ways. And so much a big part of that is fear
mm,
and needing to find ways of connecting around that community grief and um, acknowledging the feelings, that stepping foot in the maze, taking a step forward. And I feel inspired to see so many people finding meaning in their grief, whether that's through speaking out or activation, or activism or whatever that might look like. Finding meaning is the way that we feel connected to what we've lost and keep it a part of us. So I think finding that can be the ritual that we spoke of earlier, is that finding the thing that is going to help you feel like I'm doing something with this loss. For me, being a grief counselor is the way that I wanted to expand after losing my dad, that I didn't want children to be in their 30s and or 20s and never know what is grief, what is grief counseling
mm.
if they've experienced such a loss. I wanted it to be something that was more approachable and understandable. And so I think whatever way you make meaning from your experience is the way in which you're fully integrating the grief in a new layer.
Yeah. I'm just beginning to feel aware of time, but I would be like this if I don't ask you. It's been sitting on because for me when I was looking for supervisors and when I found you, there was a deep like, oh yeah, I want to work with this person. They're gonna get me and I'm gonna get them, and it really attracted
Mm.
me to your practice beyond just the experience in the film, the field, and was your work in using humor and interactive tools like game and expressive arts and geek therapeutics. Because I find that play and joy is such tools of resistance um, within healing, or how we should heal, or what ways in which we're taught to suppress or not be given tools or language to be felt. Um, it's just such a lovely way of orienting and working within grief and other parts of healing. I'm curious if you would feel okay talking about, yeah, your work within geek therapeutics or using art and humor, and how it can be supportive for people within their grieving process.
Absolutely. I think we've had these kind of big serious conversations and questions as grief is wont to do. And so much of my sessions and my healing has been through humor and play. And I think that working with kids is really what inspired me initially with that. Um, Seeing the way that kids heal is so much more organic than I think for adults
Mhm.
because they're expressing through physicality and through games and art. And uh, there's such a deep, I think, desire within so many of us to do that and also goes deeper into shame and the way that it's looked down on or so many different avenues we don't need to get into right now. But for me personally really has been finding play and then saying, wow, this is amazing, I should incorporate this into therapy. So I'm a big old D&D nerd and love, I just realized so quickly how the characters and the stories that we create through different avenues of media and in my case D&D or any kind of tabletop gaming experience was so healing because I was getting to live through these characters and practice different experiences through them. And so it's something that I did some additional training in becoming a therapeutic game master, and starting to learn more about other ways to incorporate different kind of media and games and video games even into the grief process. And it's really just about finding what works for each individual person. And so many of us learn and experience through those art forms and those stories, and then even in the creating of them, I think is very healing as well. And yeah, so I think I'm a huge fan of that. I'd love to be able to do more of that. And I'm going to be doing some more work later this year with some colleagues around doing tabletop gaming with kids who are grieving. And I'm so excited about that kind of work. And that's definitely where my juice and passion and excitement comes from. And I know has been personally healing. And so I think that idea of play, though, that we really need play as a way to work through our experiences. And even when it doesn't feel like you're doing therapy, you're doing the work, it really is. And so even watching other people do gaming and experiences, I think can also be healing. I'm thinking of I love watching Dimension 20 and their newest actual play series that they just put out speaks to these themes of community and grief and loss and even death ritual that I never would have expected to watch in a show. So something like that I think is a really beautiful way that you can incorporate this really hard thing that we're doing in a way that's fun and light. And I guess I'll always remember one of my mentors at hospice and grief counseling said that the way that we heal is tears and laughter, and that you need both in order to kind of really integrate the experience. And it's something that I will probably tattoo on myself at some point, but it's something that I say constantly and I feel so clearly in my soul and believe.
Yeah. Mm, thank you so much. And now I'm like, I should have asked these questions earlier because I have so many more to
Well,
share.
we'll have to just have a whole nother session on all this other like play and fun and all that. So I'm
Yes.
always happy to come back, and I appreciate you so much, Corey, for making this space and doing this work of opening the stigma and talking about all these hard things.
Aw, thanks, Ashley. I really appreciate your time and to be able to make contact and to have this conversation with you is just really meaningful to me. And again, best supervisor ever. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Corey.
In following today's conversation with Ashlee, if you're looking to get connected, I will have her website listed in today's show notes. Thank you so much for listening to Open the Stigma Cross Pollinating Conversations, and follow for the next episode.